Chapter 5, Blood and Seed. The moon waxed fat and yellow over the jungle, a great, watchful eye. In the newly christened Fort Defiance, the air hummed with a taut, grim energy. The survivors, from the homestead, the wounded Ellis and his sullen companion, Grimes, were now prisoners in all but name, confined to a corner of the hospital blockhouse under the ever-present, polite surveillance of Dr. Finch. Their story of a son-children massacre had curdled into a silent, festering lie that everyone knew but could not yet prove. Ketch drilled the men relentlessly. They were no longer a ragged collection of exiles, they were becoming a garrison. Musketry practice echoed across the river. They dug firing pits, built a watchtower on the bluff, and strung crude alarms of tin cans and twine in the jungle's edge. The fort was transforming from a shelter into a citadel, its log walls rising tall and sharp against the green. Jack divided his time between the fort's defenses and the dream taking shape at Stone Pool. The trading post's foundations were laid, a sturdy rectangle of notched logs on the sacred, stone-pillared ground. He insisted on calling it the Covenant House, a name that felt weighty, permanent. It was a statement. Lyanna arrived as promised. She came at dawn, paddling a slender dugout canoe upriver alone. She was young, perhaps 18, with the same calm, intelligent eyes as her father, Gray Fox. Her black hair was braided intricately with feathers and small, polished bones. She wore a simple tunic of soft, tanned hide. She carried no visible weapons, only a woven bag. The entire fort watched, holding its breath, as Jack walked down to the new, half-finished dock to meet her. Ketch stood on the palisade, a musket casually cradled, his gaze scanning the far tree line for any sign of a war party. There was none. "Welcome, Lyanna," Jack said, keeping his hands visible. "You honor us." She stepped onto the dock, her eyes missing nothing, the raw timber, the anxious faces on the wall, the industry. "My father sends his words on the wind. They say you lit a fire that spoke of peace, not fear. I have come to listen." She was not what the men expected. She was not a savage, nor a princess. She was an emissary. Finch, with his innate courtesy, showed her the hospital area, explaining through Jack, who was rapidly expanding his rudimentary son-children vocabulary, the use of boiling water and clean bandages. She watched, asked precise questions, and from her bag produced a small clay pot of pungent green paste. "For fever," she said, through Jack. "From the bark of the weeping sister tree. It is stronger than your quinine." It was the first exchange of knowledge, and it was electric. Over the next days, Lyanna moved through the fort with a quiet grace. She showed the foragers which fungi were deadly and which could heal. She taught them how to set fish traps the sun-children way. In return, she watched Brendan demonstrate joinery, her fingers tracing the smooth dovetail joints with genuine admiration. She asked Ketch about the fire sticks, not with fear, but with a tactical curiosity. "They are loud and make smoke. Good for startling. But slow. A bow is quiet." Ketch, to everyone's surprise, grunted in agreement. "Aye, lass. In the woods, a silent kill's better than a noisy warning." A fragile, practical camaraderie began to form. The men, initially wary, grew accustomed to her presence. Big Tom, who had a childlike gentleness beneath his bulk, became her unofficial protector, glaring at anyone who looked at her sideways. Plot twist, the false flag attack. The peace was a soap bubble, beautiful and doomed. It burst 10 days after Lyanna's arrival. It was a sweltering afternoon. A work party of 6 men, including Brendan, was at Stone Pool, raising the walls of the Covenant House. The rest were at the fort. Jack was in the command hut with Ketch and Lyanna, discussing the layout for herb gardens, when the first, distant pop echoed upriver. Then another. Musketry. Every man froze. Ketch was at the door in an instant. "That's from Stone Pool." Chaos erupted. Men grabbed muskets. Ketch bellowed orders. Defensive positions. You, and you, with me and Tanner. The rest, hold this wall. Jack, his heart a cold stone, seized a musket. He looked at Lyanna. Her face was a mask of confusion, then dawning horror. My people would not attack there. It is a place of stone. A talking place. I know, Jack said grimly. Stay here. With Finch. He didn't wait for an answer, following Ketch and 3 others as they pounded down the trail to the river, leaping into canoes. The paddle down to Stone Pool was a nightmare of dread. As they rounded the bend, they saw it. Smoke. The half-built Covenant house was aflame, timbers crackling. Bodies lay sprawled in the clearing. Men in the rough clothes of exiles. And among them, 2 other bodies. They were painted for war, in ochre and black, their hair dressed with feathers. Sun Children warriors. Brendan was alive, clutching a bloody arm, his face white with shock and rage. They came out of the trees. Screaming. They had spears, axes. They killed Davy and Colin straight off. We fired back. We got 2 of them, but they set the fire and vanished. Jack's eyes swept the scene. The 2 fallen warriors. The burning post. The perfect, horrific tableau of a native raid. It was exactly what the men feared, exactly what Sneed wanted. Ketch was already moving, his soldier's eye missing nothing. He knelt by one of the fallen Sun Children. The man was clearly dead, a musket ball in his chest. Ketch examined the body, then the man's weapon, a trade axe, its handle crudely wrapped. He touched the man's face paint, rubbing it between his fingers. It came off too easily, smearing like cheap grease. He looked up at Jack, his eyes deadly. This is wrong. The paint's fresh. Still wet. Applied in haste. And look. He pointed to the man's feet. He wore not moccasins, but heavy, nail-soled boots. Colonists' boots. They're not Sun Children, Jack whispered, the horror turning to icy fury. They're wearing a costume, Ketch confirmed. This was a performance. Before they could process it further, a cry came from the river. 2 canoes were approaching from downriver, moving fast. In the lead canoe stood Elias Sneed, immaculate in a linen coat, flanked by 4 armed company guards. In the second canoe were 6 nervous-looking redcoats from Sunhaven's garrison, led by a lieutenant. Sneed's canoe ground onto the shore. He stepped out, his face a portrait of grave concern that didn't touch his eyes. He surveyed the burning post, the bodies, and his gaze settled on the 2 painted corpses. Good God, Sneed said, his voice carrying. I warned Governor Blight. I warned him. The savages have broken the peace. This is an act of war. He looked directly at Jack. You see now, Tanner. Your naive parleys have only made them bold. They have attacked a crown-sanctioned construction. They have murdered crown subjects. Jack stood, facing him, the truth burning on his tongue. But he saw Sneed's guards, their hands on their weapons. He saw the confused, angry faces of his own men, who had just seen their friends killed by Sun Children. To deny it now would look like madness or treachery. They were not Sun Children, Jack stated, his voice flat and hard. Sneed raised an eyebrow. Not Sun Children. They are painted as Sun Children. They carry Sun Children weapons. They wear colonist boots. Their face paint is cheap ochre, still wet. This was staged. By whom, I wonder? A flicker of irritation crossed Sneed's face, quickly masked. He gestured to the lieutenant. Lieutenant Cobb, you are a neutral observer. What do you see? The young lieutenant looked uncomfortable. I see 2 natives, sir. And a burned-out post. Exactly. Sneed turned back to Jack, a cold triumph in his eyes. Your failure to maintain security has resulted in death and destruction. As the senior company representative, I am hereby assuming direct control of Fort Defiance for the duration of this emergency. You are relieved. Corporal Ketch, you will hand over command to Lieutenant Cobb. These men are now part of the colony's defensive militia. It was a masterstroke. Under the guise of crisis, Sneed was seizing everything they had built. Ketch's hand tightened on his musket. The men from the fort looked from Jack to Sneed, bewildered. On whose authority? Jack demanded. On the authority of the East Sunhaven Company Charter, granted by His Majesty, which gives me full jurisdiction over labor and security in the Sunhaven River District in times of threat. Sneed's smile was thin. The threat, Mr. Tanner, is now manifest. You are either with us, or you are with the savages who did this. He had painted them into a corner. To resist was mutiny. To comply was to hand over their home, their freedom, and likely their lives, to the man who had orchestrated the attack. The siege begins. That night, under Sneed's temporary command, Fort Defiance was a prison. Lieutenant Cobb and his 6 redcoats took the watchtower and the gate. Sneed's 4 company guards, hard-eyed mercenaries, patrolled the inside. The exiles were disarmed, their muskets locked in the storehouse. Jack, Ketch, and Finch were quarantined in the command hut for debriefing. Liana was nowhere to be seen. Jack prayed Finch had hidden her. From the hut's small window, Jack watched Sneed move through the torchlit compound like a spider claiming a new web. He was speaking to the men, his voice reasonable, assured. Regrettable, but necessary, security, the Crown will protect you, a proper garrison will be sent. He was erasing their story, replacing it with his own. We're dead men, Ketch said quietly, sharpening his stolen spoon-handle knife on the hut's sole stool. He can't let us live. We know the truth. He'll engineer an accident, Finch agreed. A native arrow in the back during a patrol. A tragic fall from the bluff. Jack's mind raced, scrabbling for purchase. The silver token felt like a lead weight. Useless. His eyes fell on the small, hidden cache of Blight's trade goods, a few axe heads, some cloth. And then he saw it. A small, brass-bound telescope. A spyglass. An idea, desperate and wild, began to form. He needs to legitimize the war, Jack whispered. This fake attack isn't enough. He needs a real, bloody, undeniable provocation. Something that forces even Blight to call for troops. He'll need to attack a Sun-Children village and make it look like we did it. Or vice versa. He'll use our men to do it, Ketch realized. Dress M up, point M at a village, and let the real Sun-Children tear M apart. 2 birds, 1 stone. Then we have to stop it before it happens, Jack said. And we have to expose him. We need proof he can't explain away. How? Finch asked. We're locked in here. Not all of us, Jack said, thinking of Liana, of the jungle, of the silent, watching Sun-Children. He looked at the spyglass. And he's made one mistake. He's left us our eyes. The message and the mustering. The next day, under heavy guard, the exiles were put back to work, but not on the fort. They were set to building a crude barracks for the reinforcements Sneed claimed were coming. It was brute labor, designed to break their spirit. Jack, watched constantly, worked alongside Brendan, whose wounded arm was bandaged. It were them, weren't it, Jack? Brendan muttered, his Irish brogue thick with hatred. The company men. Dressed as natives. Aye, Jack said softly. And they'll do worse if we don't stop them. How? We're disarmed. They have the fort. The fort is wood and stone, Jack said. Our strength isn't. Listen. Tonight, during the change of watch, there's a blind spot by the latrine trench, behind the hospital tent. The palisade there is still low. A man could slip over. Brendan's eyes widened. To do what? To run. Up the game trail to the west. To find Kaya. To tell him everything. To tell him Sneed will attack the nearest village, maybe Grey Fox's own, within 2 nights. They must be ready. Not to fight the fort, but to be witnesses. That's a death sentence for the runner. They'll hunt him down. Maybe, Jack said. But it's the only move on the board. He didn't ask Brendan to go. He couldn't. But that night, as a tropical downpour hammered the fort, muffling sound, Jack made his own move. Using the spyglass from the hidden cache, he focused on the jungle edge across the river. He moved it slowly, searching. And then he saw it, a flicker of movement. A figure, standing perfectly still under a giant fern. Kaya. Jack had no way to signal. But he had light. He took the spyglass and, aiming it at the single, guttering lantern in the hut, he used the lens to focus the faint beam. He pointed it at the wall, making a small, bright dot of light. He moved it. 1 flash. Pause. 2 flashes. Pause. A circle. A crude, desperate code from his childhood on the river, used by bargemen on foggy nights. Danger. Trap. Wait. He had no way of knowing if Kaya saw it, or understood. He was still at the window when the hut door opened. Sneed entered, followed by 2 guards. He was holding Liana's woven bag. Interesting trinket, Sneed said, dropping the bag on the table. Found hidden in the surgeon's supplies. Evidence of collusion with the enemy. It will make the court-martial quite straightforward. Where is she? Jack asked, his voice dangerously calm. The native girl. She is, being questioned. By men who are less sentimental about savages than you. Sneed's smile was devoid of warmth. She will confirm, before she dies, that her people planned the attack. A signed confession, of sorts. It will be most convincing. Rage, pure and volcanic, surged in Jack. He took a step forward, but the guards' muskets came up. You're a dead man, Sneed, Ketch said from the shadows, his voice like the rasp of a sword being drawn. I think not, Sergeant. I am the law here. And the law says you are traitors. At dawn, you will be executed for conspiring with hostile forces to undermine Crown security. A necessary example. He turned to leave. Sleep well. The door slammed, locked. Silence fell, broken only by the drumming rain. They were out of time. Out of moves. Then, from a dark corner of the hut where the thatch met the wall, a whisper. Jack Tanner. They all started. A section of the wall, cunningly woven with extra fronds, pushed inward. A rain-slicked, muddy figure slid through. It was Brendan, his face set with fierce determination. The latrine trench, he breathed. I'm away. Give me the message. Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through Jack. He gripped Brendan's shoulder. Tell Kaya. Sneed plans to attack Grey Fox's village at dawn tomorrow. He'll use men dressed as exiles. They must not retaliate against the fort. They must ambush the attackers, take prisoners alive, and bring them here. At dawn. Do you understand? Alive. And proof. Aye. Alive and proof. Brendan nodded, then vanished back into the wall and the sheeting rain. The dawn gambit. The night was endless. They heard no alarm. Either Brendan had made it, or he was face down in a swamp. An hour before dawn, the rain stopped. The jungle began to steam. The fort stirred. They heard the sounds of mustering, the clink of equipment. The hut door opened. Lieutenant Cobb stood there, his face pale, his sword in hand. 4 redcoats stood behind him. "It's time," he said, not meeting their eyes. They were marched into the central compound. A makeshift gallows, 2 crossbeams with ropes, had been erected. Sneed stood on the command hut steps, wearing a pistol at his belt. His 4 company guards were there, along with the rest of the redcoats. The exiles were herded into a sullen, defeated group to watch. "Subjects of the crown," Sneed announced, his voice ringing in the damp air. "You see before you the fruits of treason. These men conspired with the savage enemy, leading to the death of your comrades. Justice will now be served." Jack scanned the tree line, his heart hammering. Nothing. A noose was placed around his neck. Ketch and Finch received the same. "Any last words?" Sneed asked, his eyes gleaming. Jack looked straight at him. "You should have just hanged me in London." Sneed smirked. He raised his hand to signal the men holding the ropes. Crack. A musket shot. But not from the fort. It came from the jungle. A company guard clutching his shoulder spun and fell. Then, chaos erupted, but not the chaos Sneed wanted. From the tree line, 30 Sun Children warriors emerged. But they were not attacking the fort. They were herding a group of 10 stumbling, terrified men into the clearing before the gate. The men were dressed in a jumble of exile rags and Sun Children trinkets, their faces smeared with hastily applied, runny paint. They were Sneed's false flag party, captured to a man. And at the head of the Sun Children stood Kaya, and beside him, Brendan, alive and fierce. And Grey Fox, his face a storm. Sneed's jaw went slack. His perfect script was in tatters. Grey Fox stepped forward, his voice powerful and clear, interpreted by Kaya. "We bring you these men. They came to our village in the night, dressed as both your people and as ours, to spill blood and blame. We ask you, pale-skinned chief, are these your dogs? Who holds their leash?" All eyes turned to Sneed. The proof was in the clearing, weeping and babbling. Lieutenant Cobb lowered his sword, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Mr. Sneed, what is the meaning of this?" Sneed's eyes darted, calculating. The narrative had shattered. He went for his pistol. "A trick. The savages have captured our men and dressed them." But the lie was too thin, too late. Ketch, seeing the move, exploded into action. He threw off the man holding his rope, drove his head into the stomach of another, and snatched a bayonet from a stunned redcoat's belt. In 2 strides, he was at the gallows, cutting Jack and Finch down. In that moment of paralysis, Jack pointed at Sneed. "He is the traitor. He tried to start a war for profit. Cobb, you are an officer of the crown. Arrest him." Indecision wore on Cobb's face for a second longer. Then he saw the truth in the clearing, in the terrified faces of the painted prisoners, in the righteous fury of the Sun Children. He made his choice. "Guard! Seize Mr. Sneed." As the redcoats moved hesitantly forward, Sneed's company guards raised their muskets. A shot rang out. A redcoat fell. And then, the world dissolved into a close-quarters, brutal melee. Redcoats against company guards, exiles seizing whatever weapons they could find, the Sun Children watching from the tree line, their spears ready but held. Jack didn't see the blow coming. One of Sneed's guards, a brute with a cutlass, broke through and swung at him. Jack threw himself sideways, the blade gashing his side. He fell, pain blinding him. Through a haze, he saw Sneed, his pistol out, backing towards the river gate. He saw Ketch, locked in combat with 2 men. He saw Finch dragging a wounded redcoat to safety. And he saw Liana. She had broken free from somewhere, a knife in her hand. She moved not towards Sneed, but towards the flagpole, where the faded Union Jack hung limply. Sneed saw her too. He turned his pistol. No. Jack roared, scrambling up, his side screaming. He lunged, not at Sneed, but at Lyanna, tackling her to the ground as the pistol flashed and boomed. The ball tore through the air where she had been. They landed in a heap. Jack rolled, coming up between her and Sneed. Sneed, his face a rictus of rage, frantically tried to reload. He never finished. A spear, thrown with impossible force and accuracy, hissed through the morning air. It took Elias Sneed in the center of his chest, punching through his fine linen coat with a sickening thunk. He looked down, astonished, at the stone point protruding from his breastbone. He took one stumbling step, then collapsed. Silence fell, sudden and absolute. Everyone turned. Grey Fox stood at the open gate, his arms still extended from the throw. The remaining company guards, seeing their master dead, dropped their weapons. Jack climbed to his feet, helped Lyanna up. He looked at the scene, the dead and wounded, the exposed treachery, the two people standing amid the wreckage of a plot. Kaya walked forward, to his father's side. He looked at Jack, then at Lieutenant Cobb. "The poison leaf is cut," Kaya said. "Now we see what grows from the roots." Blood had been spilled on the bluff. But the seed of something else. Something born of shared truth, and a spear thrown not for conquest, but for justice, had been planted in the bloody mud. The war had been averted. But the battle for Sunhaven's soul had just truly begun. Chapter 6, The Covenant of Defiance. The silence after the spear's flight was thick enough to chew. Sunhaven's steamy air, usually alive with insect song, seemed to hold its breath. In the center of Fort Defiance's compound, Elias Sneed lay dead, his astonished eyes staring at the tropical sky. The stone spear had a brutal period at the end of his sentence. Around him, the tableau was frozen. Panting redcoats, surrendered company guards, bewildered exiles, and the stern line of sun-children warriors at the open gate. Lieutenant Cobb, his sword dangling from his hand, looked from Sneed's corpse to Grey Fox, who stood implacable as a cliff face. The young officer's world of clear orders and regulation had just been vaporized. Jack Tanner pushed himself up, the gash in his side a hot, insistent throb. He ignored it. The immediate danger was past, but the precipice they now stood on was even more treacherous. One wrong word, one twitchy finger on a trigger, and the fragile, blood-bought truth would shatter into a real massacre. He stepped forward, putting himself physically between the two groups. "Lieutenant Cobb," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You are now the senior Crown representative here. The company agent is dead, by the hand of a man defending his people from a fraudulent act of war. What happens next is your command." He was giving Cobb an out, a lifeline of authority. But he was also putting the weight of decision squarely on him. Cobb blinked, his gaze sweeping the scene, the captured false flag attackers in their pathetic, running paint, the bodies of the men killed in the brief melee, the expectant, angry faces of his own redcoats and the exiles. He saw the undeniable evidence. He also saw Grey Fox's spear. He swallowed, then straightened his stained uniform coat. "Stand down," he ordered his men, his voice gaining strength. "Secure the prisoners. All of them." He gestured to Sneed's guards and the painted attackers. "Sergeant Ketch, your men will assist." Ketch, wiping blood from a cut on his brow, gave a sharp nod. The exiles, moving with a new, grim purpose, began disarming and corralling the prisoners. Cobb then turned to face Grey Fox. He sheathed his sword, a deliberate, symbolic act. "Chieftain," he said, the word foreign on his tongue. On behalf of the law, I offer thanks for your restraint. And for revealing this treachery." Kaya translated. Grey Fox listened, his expression unchanging. When Cobb finished, the old warrior spoke, his eyes on Jack. "He says," Kaya translated, "the law of the land is simple, you do not bring a false face to a neighbor's fire. The man with the forked tongue is dead. His poison is spilled. But the vessel that carried him here remains. Grey Fox's gaze shifted pointedly to the Union Jack on its pole, then to the fort itself. The meaning was clear. Sneed was just a symptom. The system that sent him, the company, the distant, uncaring crown, was the disease. We are not all him, Jack said, stepping forward again. He looked at Grey Fox, then turned to include the exiles, the redcoats, even the frightened prisoners. We are men cast out, men sent to die, men following orders they didn't understand. And you, he looked to the Sun children, are men defending your homes. We have all been used. Do we let the user's ghost keep us at each other's throats? He let the question hang. Then he gestured to the burned-out ruin of the trading post at Stone Pool, visible downriver as a smudge of smoke. Sneed burned that. He burned a place meant for peace. He did it because he feared what it represented. I say we rebuild it. Not as a crown fort, not as a Sun Children village. As something new. A place where the law isn't from a king across the sea or a chief in the hills, but from the agreement of those who live here. A covenant. The word landed with profound weight. Covenant. A binding agreement. A promise not of submission, but of mutual creation. Finch, bandaging a redcoat's arm, spoke up, his educated voice carrying. A place of free trade. Of shared knowledge. Where a man is judged by his actions, not his birth or the color of his skin. Grey Fox's eyes narrowed, considering. He spoke to Kaya at length. Kaya translated, my father asks, who rules this covenant? The man with the most guns. The man who speaks the prettiest words. Jack had anticipated this. A council, he said. Chosen by the people. Men from the fort. Men from the Sun Children. Men from any who wish to live here under its terms. They make the laws together. They settle disputes. They stand together against those who would break the peace. It was anarchy. It was sedition. It was the most breathtakingly radical idea any of them had ever heard. To the exiles, it was a promise of belonging. To the redcoats, it was mutiny. To the Sun Children, it was a fascinating, dangerous experiment. Lieutenant Cobb looked horrified. Tanner, you're talking about establishing an independent territory. That's treason. What's the alternative, Lieutenant? Jack shot back. You report Sneed's death as a native uprising. The Crown sends 500 troops to burn the jungle and hang every one of us as collaborators. Or do you tell the truth, that a company agent went rogue, and that a new, stable order has been negotiated with the natives, one that guarantees peace and trade? He moved closer, his voice lowering. Which report gets you a promotion, and which gets you a court-martial? Cobb wavered, trapped between duty and survival. It was Ketch who broke the stalemate. He walked to the flagpole. Without ceremony, he untied the halyard and lowered the faded Union Jack. He didn't burn it. He folded it roughly and handed it to a stunned Lieutenant Cobb. The Crown's authority failed here today, son. It bred a snake like Sneed. You can be part of what comes next, or you can be a relic of what was. But you can't stop it. The act was shocking, final. The flag was down. Grey Fox watched this, then gave a slow, deep nod. He spoke. We will hear more of this covenant, Kaya said. We will send listeners. We will watch. For one cycle of the moon. If the words become actions, we will join your council. If they become more lies, he left the threat unspoken, but his hand rested on his knife. It was not agreement. It was a trial. A month to prove their worth. The first council. The following week was a whirlwind of desperate creation. Lieutenant Cobb, after a long night staring at the folded flag, made his choice. He and his redcoats would remain, not as garrison, but as volunteer peacekeepers under the nascent Covenant's authority. It was a face-saving fiction, but it worked. His men, weary of serving corrupt company interests, accepted it with relief. The exiles, now calling themselves Defiance, threw themselves into rebuilding Stone Pool with a fervor that bordered on religious. The Covenant House rose again, larger, sturdier, with a great hall for meetings. Jack insisted on a round table for the council, carved from a single massive ironwood slab. The first election was a raw, democratic miracle. The Defiance chose Jack, Ketch, and Finch as their 3 counselors. Brendan was elected as head of works. Big Tom, to his own bafflement, was made chief of the watch. The Sun children sent 3 listeners as promised, Kaya, Liana, and an older, shrewd woman named Elara, who was a lorekeeper and healer. They observed, participated in the physical labor, and asked piercing questions. The first official council of the Covenant convened at the new round table, with Grey Fox himself attending as an observer. The topic, justice for the prisoners. The false flag attackers and Sneed's guards were brought in. The evidence was laid bare. The council debated. Ketch argued for military execution. Traitors in time of war. A bullet's quick. Elara, the Sun children lorekeeper, spoke through Kaya. In our way, a life taken requires a life to balance. But a life can also be given in service, to heal the damage. Finch proposed permanent exile upriver, beyond the mountains. Jack listened, then offered a 4th way. Their crime was to follow a poisonous order for pay. Their sentence should be to build, without pay, what they tried to destroy. They will be laborers. They will rebuild everything. They will be fed, housed, but they will earn no coin, have no voice, for 5 years. Their freedom will be bought with the sweat of their hands, repairing the community they assaulted. It was a radical notion, rehabilitation over retribution. The Sun children were intrigued, their justice often involved restorative acts. The Defiance, many of whom had known only the whip and the gallows, were skeptical but willing to try. Grey Fox finally spoke. This is a new path. We will watch this too. Let them build. The sentence was passed. It was the Covenant's first law. Plot twist, the governor's visit and the charter. News, in Sunhaven, traveled on the slow river and in the whispers of traders. Within 2 weeks, Governor Blight arrived. He came not with soldiers, but with a single sloop and a small entourage that included a clerk and 2 nervous aides. He looked even more dissipated than before, but his eyes held a keen, calculating light. Jack received him at the new dock at Stone Pool. The sight of the thriving building site, the orderly activity, the mingling of exiles and Sun children, clearly stunned him. Good God, Tanner, Blight murmured, accepting a mug of palm wine. You've actually done it. You've built a polite anarchy. We've built peace, Your Excellency, Jack corrected gently. In a private meeting in the nearly complete Covenant Hall, Blight got down to business. Sneed is dead. The company is screaming for blood in London. They're calling it a native mutiny and demanding the charter for the entire Sunhaven River District be revoked from Crown oversight and given wholly to them for pacification. He took a long drink. My head is on the block. If I report the truth, that a group of exiles and natives have formed an independent commune, I'll be recalled for incompetence and hanged. If I endorse the company's version, they get their war, and I'm merely replaced by a company puppet. There's a third option, Jack said. I'm listening. You give us a charter. Blight choked on his wine. A what? A charter. From the governor's office. Recognizing the free territory of the Sunhaven River Covenant as a self-governing entity under the Crown's protection. We handle our own internal affairs, justice, trade. We guarantee peace on the river, provide a stable market for company goods, taxed, of course, through your office. You report to London that you've successfully negotiated a groundbreaking treaty with the Sun Children, securing a vast territory for trade without military expense. You turn a disaster into a diplomatic triumph. Jack leaned forward. You get the credit, the increased customs revenue, and a buffer between the company and the natives. We get legitimacy and the right to be left alone. Blight stared into his cup, his mind racing. It was brilliant. It was also utterly illegal. But legality was a flexible concept on the frontier. They'll never allow it in London, he whispered. London is months away, Jack said. By the time they hear, it will be a fait accompli. A thriving, peaceful, tax-paying territory. What are they going to do? Send an army to crush a successful colony? The political winds at home, they're not favorable to new colonial adventures after America. They'll grumble, they'll send inspectors, but if the books are in order and the silver is flowing, they'll accept it. He was gambling on the Empire's greed and its war-weariness. Blight was silent for a long time. Then, a slow, grim smile spread across his dissipated face. You have a document in mind, I assume. Finch, with his precise legal mind, had already drafted it. The Charter of the Sunhaven River Covenant. It was a masterpiece of ambiguous phrasing, citing obsolete royal prerogatives and blurring the lines between a trading company outpost and a sovereign entity. It named Jack Tanner as First Speaker of the Council, and Governor Blight as Crown Patron. Blight read it, his hands trembling, but not from drink this time. From the sheer, terrifying audacity. He took out his seal and a stick of wax. He heated it over a lamp. This will either be my ticket back to a country estate, or the evidence they used to hang me, he said. The seal came down with a definitive thump. The covenant now had a piece of paper. Flimsy, questionable, but radiant with possibility. The challenge, the fever. Legitimacy didn't stop the mosquitoes. As the rainy season reached its peak, the fever Finch had warned of swept through the fledgling community. It wasn't the gentle ague of England, it was a brutal, bone-breaking pestilence that turned men's skin yellow and their minds to delirium. The hospital tent, expanded under Finch's direction, overflowed. The Sun Children were not immune. Lyanna and Alara worked side by side with Finch, applying their bark paste and strange, steaming herbal infusions. Finch used his quinine and brandy. They compared results, argued, synthesized. But people died. 3 defiants. 2 Sun Children elders. The community's fragile spirit wavered under the relentless, indifferent assault. The low point came when Big Tom, who had been a rock, fell ill. The big man raved, his temperature terrifying. Finch looked grim. I don't know if he'll last the night. Jack sat by his bedside, wiping his brow. This was the true test. Not of treaties or councils, but of simple human care. Would the covenant mean anything in the face of death? That night, Alara approached Finch with a new idea. A combination of the weeping sister bark paste and the quinine, administered with a tea made from a vine she called spirit binder, used in Sun Children rituals to fight soul sickness. It is not just the body that breaks, Alara said through Lyanna. The sickness attacks the will. The vine helps the spirit hold on. It was unorthodox, unscientific. Finch, the man of reason, looked at the desperate, dying man, then at the earnest face of the lorekeeper. He nodded. We try. They administered the hybrid treatment. For hours, there was no change. Then, near dawn, Big Tom's thrashing stopped. His breathing deepened. His fever broke. He would live. The news spread through the community like a cleansing rain. The shared victory over death did more to bind them than any charter. A Sun Children remedy had saved a defiant giant. The covenant was no longer just a political idea, it was a healing reality. The oath. On the last day of the trial month, with the fever receding and the covenant house complete, the entire community gathered at Stone Pool. The round table had been carried outside. The council sat. Jack, Ketch, Finch, Brendan, Kaya, Liana, and Alara. Grey Fox stood before them, with Lieutenant Cobb and Governor Blight, who had stayed to see the experiment through, looking on. Grey Fox spoke, his voice rolling over the assembled hundreds, defiance in their canvas, redcoats in faded red, sun children in hides and tattoos. For 1 moon, we have watched, Kaya translated. We saw you lower a flag, but raise a hull. We saw you spare lives that could have been taken. We saw your healers and ours fight death as one. The words have become actions. The path is new, but it is solid underfoot. He turned to the council. The Sun Children will join this covenant. We will add our voice to your council. We will add our strength to your walls. We will add our wisdom to your law. Not as subjects. Not as conquerors. As partners. A great, collective exhale went through the crowd. Then a cheer erupted, a ragged, joyful noise that startled the birds from the trees. Jack stood. He raised his hand for silence. Then let us swear it, he said. Not to a king, or a chief, but to each other, and to this land. He placed his hand on the ironwood table. One by one, the councillors did the same, Ketch's scarred hand, Finch's slender one, Brendan's calloused, Big Tom's massive paw, Kaya's lean fingers, Liana's delicate ones, Ilara's aged and steady. We, the people of the Sunhaven River, Jack declared, his voice ringing clear, do hereby covenant together to build a community of justice, trade, and mutual defense. To govern ourselves by counsel. To treat all men and women who abide by these laws as equals. To defend this territory from all who would break this peace. So swear we all. The crowd took up the oath, a roaring wave of voices in English, Gaelic, and the flowing tongue of the Sun Children. So swear we all. As the sound faded, Jack looked out at the faces, the hopeful, the hardened, the redeemed. They had a charter, a council, a sworn oath. They had a territory. The exile Jack Tanner was no more. In his place stood the first speaker of the covenant. But as the celebrations began, a wild fusion of fiddle music, Sun Children drumming, and shared rum, Jack caught a glimpse of Governor Blight at the edge of the crowd. The governor was not celebrating. He was looking north, up the river, towards the distant mountains, a deep unease on his face. He leaned over and whispered to his clerk, who nodded and hurried away towards the sloop. A cold trickle of apprehension cut through Jack's joy. The charter was signed, the oath sworn. But he knew in his bones that for the East Sunhaven Company, this was not an end. It was a declaration of war by other means. And their reply would not be a piece of paper. It would be written in blood and gold. The covenant was born. Now it would have to fight for its life. Chapter 7, The Golden Fever. The covenant's first true spring was a season of miraculous, terrifying growth. Peace brought prosperity, and the Sunhaven River became a bustling artery. The Covenant House at Stone Pool was the thriving heart. Under its broad, thatched roof, one could hear a dozen languages. The guttural German of a trapper, the musical lilt of an Irish homesteader, the flowing tones of the Sun Children, the sharp banter of ex-redcoats turned merchants. The air smelled of smoked meat, new timber, spices, and the rich, earthy scent of coffee beans traded from a passing Portuguese sloop. Jack Tanner, as first speaker, presided over it all from a simple office off the main hall. His days were a whirlwind of adjudication. Settling a dispute over fishing rights between a Defiant and a Sun Children family, approving the plans for a new schoolhouse, to be taught by Finch in the mornings and Ilara in the afternoons, and negotiating the price of iron tools with a wary factor from a neutral French settlement to the south. The silver token from London was now embedded in the surface of the great ironwood table, a silent, unanswered question at the center of their new world. The community had solidified. They were no longer Defiants and Sun Children, but Covenanters. They had a militia, now called the Rangers, led by Ketch and trained in a fusion of European drill and Sun Children skirmish tactics. They had a codex of laws, painstakingly written by Finch and translated by Liana. They even had a currency, crude copper and silver tokens stamped with the emblem of the Covenant, a river encircled by a sun, a deliberate fusion of both people's symbols. But prosperity, as Finch often mused, was a double-edged sword. The first cut came from a grizzled, one-eyed former convict turned prospector named Silas "Lucky" Grubb. He arrived at Stone Pool one afternoon, his clothes tattered, his eyes blazing with a fervor that had nothing to do with God. He slammed a small, stained deerskin pouch onto the trade counter with a weighty thud. "I'll be talking my weight in gunpowder, flour, and a new pan," he growled. The trade master, a former bookkeeper named Higgins, untied the pouch and peered inside. His breath caught. He poured a small amount into his palm. It wasn't dust. It was flakes, and small, rough nuggets, gleaming with a dull, buttery yellow in the lantern light. Gold. The news traveled through the Covenant house like a lightning strike. Within an hour, a crowd had gathered, voices rising in a cacophony of greed and disbelief. Jack pushed his way through. "Where?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. Grubb's one good eye gleamed with cunning. "A day's march north. A creek feed in the upper Sunhaven. Panned it from the gravel myself. It's there. Thick as stars in the sky." A euphoric rush swept the room. Visions of fortunes danced in the eyes of men who had arrived with nothing. But Jack felt only a cold dread coiling in his gut. He looked at Ketch, whose face was set in granite. He looked at Finch, who had paled. They all knew history. They knew what gold did. The rush. Grubb, despite being sworn to secrecy, was drunk on rum and his own glory by nightfall. By the next dawn, he was gone, along with a dozen other men who had acquired pans, shovels, and a burning hunger. The golden fever had begun. It started as a trickle. A few men slipping away from their duties. Then a flood. Within a week, a quarter of the Covenant's able-bodied men had abandoned their posts. Farmers left their fields half-tended, carpenters dropped their tools, even a few rangers went absent. A shantytown of tents and lean-tos, dubbed Grubb's Gulch, sprang up overnight on the northern riverbank, a festering monument to sudden hope. The council convened in emergency session. The mood was grim. "It's tearing us apart," Brendan said, slamming a fist on the table. "The sawmill's idle. The new bridge is half-built. Who's gonna bring in the harvest?" Kaya's expression was troubled. "Our young men hear the talk. They see the pale skins with their yellow rock. They ask why they hunt deer when they can dig metal from the stream. The metal is a curse," Elara stated flatly. "It makes men's hearts heavy and their spirits blind. It brings the worst kind of hunger. We can't stop it," Jack said, his mind racing. "If we forbid it, they'll go anyway, and they'll see us as tyrants hoarding the wealth. We have to control it. Channel it." "How?" Ketch asked. "You can't put a leash on a dream. We tax it," Jack said, the idea forming as he spoke. "Not to fill our own coffers. A community fund. 1/10 of all gold found, weighed and recorded at the Covenant House. The fund pays for what they're abandoning, it hires men to work the fields and finish the bridges. It builds a proper hospital, not a tent. It pays for teachers, for the rangers. The gold doesn't leave, it builds the Covenant stronger." It was a brilliant, pragmatic solution. It acknowledged the fever but sought to inoculate the body politic against its worst effects. The Gold Edict was proclaimed. Every prospector must register their claim at Stone Pool. 1/10 of their yield went to the fund. In return, the Covenant guaranteed the safety of their claims and provided a secure assay office. Some grumbled, but most accepted. Order, of a sort, was imposed. The Covenant House became a bank as well as a market. Higgins, the trade master, now had scales and ledgers for gold dust. Plot twist, the Sun Children's land. The crisis deepened not from within Grubb's Gulch, but from the land itself. Kaya and Grey Fox requested an urgent council. "The creek the pale skins dig," Grey Fox said, his voice like grinding stones. "It has a name. Ahanu's Tears. It is a sacred place. The bones of our ancestors sleep in the hills above it. The spirits of the stream are not for disturbing." Jack's heart sank. This was the clash he feared. "We did not know," he said, meaning it. The prospector did not ask. "But the men are there now. Hundreds of them. If we try to remove them by force, there will be a war right here, among ourselves." "Then your law is worthless," Kaya said, not with anger, but deep disappointment. "It protects your people's digging, but not our ancestors' sleep." "The law must protect both," Jack insisted. He turned to the council. "We add a new law to the codex. No claim may be staked on land held sacred by the Sun Children without the consent of their council. Existing claims on Ahanu's Tears, they must pay a second tithe. Not to the community fund, but to the Sun Children Council, as rent and reparation. And the diggers must agree to stay away from the burial hills." It was a compromise that pleased no one fully. The prospectors howled about a savage tax. The Sun Children saw it as blood money for desecration. But it held the peace. Barely. The devil in the gulch. The third and most dangerous symptom of the fever was human. With the gold came a new breed of man. Not hopeful exiles, but hard-bitten veterans of other rushes, from Georgia, from California. Men like Gentleman John Harper. Harper arrived not with a pan, but with an entourage. He was a stark contrast to the grimy prospectors. He wore a clean, if travel-worn, suit, had a carefully trimmed beard, and spoke with an educated American accent. He set up a large tent in Grubb's Gulch that served as a saloon, gambling den, and loan office. He sold whiskey at 10 times its value, bought gold at half its worth, and offered protection to scared miners whose claims were jumped by bullies he secretly employed. He was a parasite, and he was sucking the life from the gulch, turning it from a hopeful shantytown into a violent, desperate sinkhole. Fights broke out daily. 2 men were killed over a disputed claim. The violence began to spill downriver, to the very edges of Stone Pool. Ketch wanted to march the Rangers in and shut Harper down. But Harper was clever. He operated just inside the letter of the Covenant's hastily written laws. His security men had registered as prospectors. The fights were personal disputes. "He's a snake," Ketch spat in council. "You don't reason with a snake. You cut its head off." "We need proof he's orchestrating the violence," Finch countered. "Otherwise, we look like tyrants crushing free enterprise." Jack decided on a 2-pronged approach. He sent Ketch and 2 of his steadiest rangers, including a fierce, quiet woman named Sarah who had been transported for stealing a loaf to feed her siblings, into the gulch undercover as prospectors. Their job was to gather evidence. And he paid a visit to Gentleman John Harper himself. The saloon tent was a miasma of smoke, sweat, and desperation. Harper held court at a corner table, playing chess against himself. He looked up as Jack approached, a polite, empty smile on his face. First speaker Tanner. "An honor." "Drink?" "No." Jack remained standing. "Your business is causing problems, Harper. The violence ends today." "Violence?" Harper spread his hands innocently. "I sell libations and offer financial services. The regrettable passions of miners are not my doing. This is a frontier, sir. Men will be men. Men will be held to account," Jack said. "By our laws. And our laws are getting sharper. Effective immediately, all commercial enterprises in Covenant territory require a license from the Council. The fee is 20% of profits. Paid in gold. In advance. It was a blatant power play. Harper's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned cold. That's a steep tax for the privilege of civilizing a wilderness. The wilderness was doing fine, Jack said. He leaned in. I know your type, Harper. You're a locust. You strip a place bare and move on. You won't strip this one. Pack up and leave, or my next visit will be with 50 rangers. He turned and left, feeling Harper's gaze like a dagger between his shoulder blades. He'd made an enemy, but he'd also drawn a line. The trap and the fire. 2 nights later, the trap was sprung, but not by Jack. Sarah, the ranger, stumbled into the Covenant house just before midnight, her face bloodied, her shirt torn. Harper, she gasped. He's bringing in guns. A shipment. Coming down the Old North Trail tomorrow. He's planning to take over the gulch by force, then challenge the Covenant's authority. He's got 30 men sworn to him. Ketch was already buckling on his sword. We ambushed the shipment. Catch him red-handed. No, Jack said, a darker plan forming. We let it through. They stared at him. We let the guns reach Harper's tent. Then we don't arrest him for getting guns. We arrest him for using them. We need an act of war, not a paperwork violation. It was a gamble of terrifying proportions. Letting a small army arm itself in their backyard. The next afternoon, the shipment, crates of modern, breech-loading carbines and ammunition, arrived at Harper's tent. Jack watched from a concealed ridge with Ketch and a squad of rangers. He'll move tonight, Ketch predicted. Before we can react. As dusk fell, they saw Harper's men distributing the carbines. The mood in the gulch turned from desperate to dangerously festive. Harper emerged, holding a new rifle aloft, making a speech they couldn't hear. Then, he pointed. Not towards Stone Pool, but towards the nearby hills, the sacred Sun Children burial grounds. He's not coming for us first, Jack realized with horror. He's going to provoke the Sun Children. Start a war and position himself as the gulch's defender against the savages. It was a monstrous, brilliant tactic. It would force the Covenant to choose sides, tearing it apart. We move now, Ketch said, cocking his rifle. Wait, Jack said, his eyes fixed on the gulch. He saw a small, flickering light near Harper's supply tent. Then another. Torches. What in hell, Ketch muttered. Then they saw her. Liana. She was not alone. With her were a dozen Sun Children, not warriors, but elders and women. And with them were a group of Covenanters, miners' wives, tradesmen, people from Stone Pool. They stood between Harper's armed men and the path to the hills, holding not weapons, but torches and the Covenant banner, the river and sun on a field of green. Harper's men hesitated, confused by this silent, mixed line of defiance. Liana's voice rang out, clear and strong in the twilight. You will not pass. This land is under Covenant law. You bring guns to break the peace. Then you break it with all of us. We stand together. It was a breathtaking act of moral courage. Harper, enraged, raised his rifle. You stupid girl, get out of the way. Fire on her, Jack whispered, his blood running cold, and you're a dead man. But Harper didn't fire. He saw the solidarity. He saw his narrative crumbling. His own men, many of whom had families in Stone Pool, looked uncertain. In that moment of hesitation, Jack gave the signal. A single shot fired into the air. From the surrounding ridges, 50 rangers stood up, muskets and rifles aimed at the gulch. From the other side, another 30 Sun Children warriors, led by Kaya, emerged from the trees, spears and bows ready. Harper was surrounded, his coup stillborn. John Harper. Jack's voice boomed across the clearing as he walked down, unarmed, into the center of the standoff. You are under arrest for the unlawful importation of arms, incitement to riot, and conspiracy to breach the peace of the Covenant. Drop your weapons. Harper's face twisted with hatred. For a second, Jack thought he'd shoot. But the maths was undeniable. He slowly lowered his rifle. His men, one by one, followed suit. The Rangers moved in, disarming them. As Harper was led away in manacles, he snarled at Jack, "This isn't over. There's more gold here. And more men like me. You can't stop the tide." The aftermath and the deeper vein. The gold fever had been checked, not cured. Harper and his lieutenants were sentenced to 20 years hard labor in the newly established quarry, building the foundations for the Covenant's permanent buildings with the very stone they'd sought to undermine. The community fund, swollen with the tithes and the confiscated wealth from Harper's operation, began its work. The hospital rose, a solid timber hull. The schoolhouse opened. A proper road was begun between Stone Pool and the fort. But the incident left scars. The Sun children were grateful for Lyanna's bravery and the Covenant's defense of their land, but the sacred creek was still being torn up. The gulch, though calmer, still pulsed with greedy energy. One evening, as Jack reviewed the assay reports, Higgins placed a large, rough nugget on his desk. It was unlike the alluvial flakes from the creek. It was a quartz vein specimen, gold threaded through white rock like a secret script. "Where did this come from?" Jack asked. "A Sun children trader," Higgins said. "From deep in their territory, in the shadow of the Stone Father Mountain. He said there are caves, whole veins of this. His people have known of it for generations. They call it, the Sun's bones. They consider it the solidified blood of the Earth Spirit, not to be touched." Jack held the heavy rock, its potential dizzying. This wasn't placer gold for panning. This was a motherlode. A kingdom's ransom. "Does anyone else know?" he asked quietly. "The trader only brought it to me. He said the elders are arguing. Some, seeing the pale skin's hunger, think they should mine it themselves, to buy guns and secure their future. Others say it would be a spiritual catastrophe." Jack looked out the window at the peaceful lights of Stone Pool. The gold fever from a creek had nearly broken them. The fever from a mountain of gold would consume the world. This secret was a powder keg. He made a decision. Buy the nugget. Pay well. But tell the trader the Covenant Council respectfully advises the Sun people to leave the Sun's bones where they sleep. Tell him, some hungers, once awakened, can never be sated. And they eat the soul first. He locked the nugget in a strongbox, along with the silver token. 2 secrets now. One from a shadowy patron in London, one from the very heart of the land. Both were temptations. Both were threats. The golden fever had been a crisis of greed. But as Jack sat in the quiet of his office, he knew the true test was yet to come. It would be a crisis of the spirit. And the choices they made would determine whether the Covenant was a community of men, or just another tribe with a newer, shinier idol. Chapter 8, The King's Charter. Peace on the Sunhaven River was a careful, cultivated thing, like a garden planted on a battlefield. The harvest, however, was real. The Covenant's first full year saw Stone Pool transform from a trading post into a proper town. The hospital had its first permanent surgeon, Finch, of course, assisted by Ilara and Lyanna. The schoolhouse echoed with the recitation of English grammar and Sun children star lore. The fields yielded maize, yams, and even a struggling but defiant crop of English wheat. The community fund, fattened by the gold tithes, paved the main street with crushed river stone and financed a watchtower that overlooked both the town and the sacred bend in the river. But Jack Tanner, presiding over the council's weekly meeting in the Great Hall, felt the peace like a thin sheet of ice over deep, dark water. The strongbox in his office held its two secrets, the silver token and the quartz gold nugget. He had shared the nugget's existence only with Ketch and Finch, swearing them to secrecy. The knowledge was a weight they carried together. The road to the coast is passable for wagons now, Brendan reported, pointing at a charcoal map on the wall. We can get supplies in 10 days instead of 3 weeks. But, Jack prompted. But we're seeing more traffic the other way, Brendan said, his face troubled. Not traders. Surveyors. Men with theodolites and notebooks, wearing company colors. They're marking trees, taking soil samples up near the foothills. They don't stop at Stone Pool. Don't pay tolls. Just nod and move on like they own the breeze. Ketch grunted. Sneed's dead, but the company's a hydra. Cut off one head, another grows. They're sniffing around the gold strikes. It's more than sniffing, said a new voice from the doorway. Mirabelle Thorne stood there, travel-stained but erect. She was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp green eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, the widow of a planter and now the Covenant's most successful exporter of exotic hardwoods. She was also their best source of intelligence from Sunhaven town. Miss Thorne, Jack stood. You're back early. I came ahead of my shipment, she said, striding to the table. Because the talk in Governor Blight's parlor isn't about timber. It's about charters. The East Sunhaven Company has petitioned the Privy Council in London. They're seeking a royal charter of monopoly for the entire Sunhaven River Basin, citing chronic instability and the failure of Crown governance to secure assets. A cold silence fell. A royal charter would override Blight's flimsy document. It would give the company not just control, but sovereign rights, to tax, to raise armies, to dispense justice. The Covenant would be illegal on its own land. On what grounds? Finch asked, aghast. We are the stability. On the grounds, Mirabelle said grimly, that you are a rogue settlement of exiles and seditious natives, squatting on Crown land and inciting unrest. They have agents in London painting you as a second version of the American rebels, but with spears and pagan rituals. Blight? Jack asked. The governor is drinking himself into a stupor nightly. He knows he backed the wrong horse. The company has connections in Parliament, he has debts. He told me, in his cups, they're sending a man. A Crown Commissioner. With a military escort. To assess the situation. It's a hanging party, Jack. The Commissioner arrives. They came a month later, on the first day of autumn. Not a sloop, but a sleek naval brig, HMS Dauntless, its gunports closed but ominous. It anchored in the bay off Sunhaven town. The next day, a procession of longboats made its way upriver, flying the royal standard. The Covenant watched from the bluffs. It was a formidable display, 30 redcoats in fresh scarlet, a detachment of Royal Marines in blue, and at the center, a man in civilian dress but with an air of absolute authority. He was tall, hawk-faced, in his 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. This was Sir James Willoughby, the Crown Commissioner. They did not stop at Stone Pool. They proceeded directly to Fort Defiance, now more a ceremonial guard post than a fortress. Willoughby took it over, raising the Union Jack on the pole Ketch had lowered. The message was unmistakable. Jack received the summons that evening. A crisp note delivered by a Marine. Mr. Jack Tanner, styling himself first speaker, is requested to attend upon Sir James Willoughby, His Majesty's Commissioner, at Fort Defiance at noon tomorrow. Not invited. Requested. The language of a superior to a subordinate. The council convened in emergency session, the mood ranging from fury to despair. We fight, Ketch stated flatly. We have the Rangers, we know the land. We can make that fort a tomb for them. And become the rebels they say we are. Finch countered. They have a warship. They can shell Stone Pool into splinters. They can blockade the river. We'd be strangled in a month. We negotiate, Jack said, though his stomach was a knot of tension. We show him what we've built. We show him the peace, the prosperity. We make him see that the covenant is crown governance, working better than the company ever could. He won't see, Mirabelle warned. Men like him see only hierarchy. You are an exile. We are all, nothing, in their eyes. Then we must make him see something else, Jack said, an idea forming. We must show him we are not nothing. We are an asset. A valuable, functioning asset. And we must find his lever. The audience. The next day, Jack walked to Fort Defiance, accompanied only by Ketch and Finch. He wore his best clothes, simple, sturdy linen, but clean. He carried no weapon. The redcoats at the gate eyed them with disdainful curiosity. Sir James Willoughby had taken over the old command hut. He'd had a campaign desk and chair brought in. Maps of the region were spread out, with areas marked in red wax, company logging concessions, mining claims that didn't exist. He did not rise when they entered. Mr. Tanner, Willoughby said, his voice dry and precise. The infamous piss artist. One hears the most remarkable stories, even in London. Jack ignored the barb. Sir James. Welcome to the Sunhaven River Covenant. Willoughby's lips twitched. It has no legal standing. You are, by the Crown's law, still an exiled convict. These men are deserters, or worse. The natives are subjects, albeit savage ones. This experiment is over. With respect, sir, Finch spoke, his Edinburgh accent calm and reasonable. The experiment, as you call it, has resulted in peace, increased trade, and the stable administration of a territory that was previously a drain on the treasury and a charnel house. The governor's own charter. Governor Blight's charter is a pathetic fiction, drafted under duress or intoxication, Willoughby cut him off. It is revoked. My mandate is clear. To reassert Crown control, assess the viability of the East Sunhaven Company's petition for a royal charter, and disband any unlawful assemblies. The company, Jack said, keeping his voice level, staged a false flag attack to start a war for profit. Their agent, Elias Sneed, was killed while attempting murder. We have prisoners, testimonies. Allegations from convicted criminals and savages, Willoughby dismissed with a wave. Irrelevant. The Crown deals in facts of power and law. The fact is, you have no title to this land. The company does, or soon will. My recommendation will be pivotal. Jack saw it then. Willoughby wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was an arbiter. And he was for sale. Not necessarily with money, but with advantage. What advantage could the covenant offer? What if there was another fact? Jack asked quietly. Willoughby raised an eyebrow. Jack nodded to Finch, who opened a leather satchel and placed the strongbox on Willoughby's desk. Jack unlocked it. He did not touch the silver token. He lifted out the quartz gold nugget, the size of a man's fist, and set it on the map with a heavy thud. The room stilled. The nugget gleamed dully in the shaft of sunlight, a primal, mesmerizing spectacle of wealth. Willoughby's eyes fastened on it. All his polished detachment vanished for a split second, replaced by pure, avaricious astonishment. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold, heavy stone. Where, he breathed, did this come from? From the heart of this territory, Jack said. There is more. A mountain of it. The Sun children have known of it for generations. They call it the Sun's bones. They consider it sacred. Untouchable. Willoughby leaned back, his mind racing, his fingers drumming on the desk. He understood the implications instantly. A motherlode. Not placer dust in a creek, but a sovereign's ransom in a mountain. It changed everything. The company doesn't know, Jack pressed his advantage. If they get their charter, they'll find it eventually. They'll rip this land apart, provoke a war with the Sun Children that will make the Indian rebellions look like a picnic, and ship the wealth to shareholders in London. The crown will get its cut, but the chaos will be on your report, Sir James. And your alternative? Willoughby asked, his voice dangerously soft. The Covenant controls the territory. We control access. We have a working relationship with the Sun Children. We can manage the extraction. Slowly. Carefully. Profitably. The Crown's share, your share, as the architect of this new arrangement, would be substantial, and ongoing. Not a one-time grant to a company, but a permanent revenue stream to the treasury. And your name would be associated not with crushing a rebellion, but with unlocking the greatest mineral wealth the Empire has seen since Potosi. It was a breathtaking gamble. Jack was offering a partnership with the devil, betting that greed was a stronger motivator than ideology. Willoughby was silent for a long minute, staring at the nugget. He was weighing the risks. Going against the powerful company. Betting on a band of exiles. But the prize. The company's petition is powerful, he said finally. They have allies. To recommend against them, I need more than a rock and a promise. I need irrefutable evidence of their malfeasance, to justify stripping them of their claims. And I need assurances of stability. The Crown cannot be seen to treat with lawless men. The double game and the spy. The assurances Willoughby demanded were steep. He would stay for a month to observe. The Covenant would provide him with a detailed survey of the territory, including the general location of the gold vein, but not its precise whereabouts. Jack would provide something else, the name of his secret patron in London, the owner of the silver token. The shadow that protects you must become a shadow that protects this arrangement, Willoughby said. I must know who, in the halls of power, is playing this game. Jack was trapped. The token was his only connection to the mysterious forces that had shaped his exile. To give it up was to burn his last bridge to that world. But to refuse was to lose everything here. That night, in the depths of the Covenant house, Jack made a copy of the token's emblem, the eye within the sunburst. He gave the drawing to Willoughby. This is all I have. The man who gave it to me is named Proudfoot, a solicitor. But he was only an intermediary. Willoughby studied the drawing, his face unreadable. The eye of Providence, within a radiant sun. An interesting symbol. More Masonic than mercantile. He pocketed it. I will make inquiries. The commissioner's month-long stay began a strange, tense dance. He toured Stone Pool, asked sharp questions of merchants, watched a ranger drill that combined musket volleys with silent tree-running. He dined with Grey Fox and Ilara, asking about Sun Children law. He was polite, thorough, and utterly inscrutable. Meanwhile, the company was not idle. Their surveyors became more brazen, their markers appearing closer and closer to Stone Pool itself. Tensions flared. A Sun Children hunting party found a survey team on the edge of the Burial Hills. Words were exchanged. A surveyor's compass was smashed. Willoughby used it. He wrote dispatches, sending them downriver on HMS Dauntless tenders. Jack had no idea if they were reports condemning the Covenant or the company. The breaking point came 3 weeks in. Sarah, the ranger who had infiltrated Harper's gang, came to Jack in a panic. It's one of the commissioner's men. The quiet clerk, the one who's always writing. I saw him last night, past the sentry line, meeting with a man from the company survey team. He passed him a paper. A spy. In Willoughby's own entourage. Jack confronted Willoughby immediately in his quarters at the fort. To his surprise, the commissioner didn't deny it. Of course I have a man reporting to the company, Willoughby said calmly, pouring 2 glasses of port. They expect it. He feeds them what I want them to know. For instance, He has just informed them that my mind is nearly made up, that I find the covenant to be a nest of sedition and the Sun children to be irredeemably hostile. That I will recommend the royal charter be granted, and that a military expedition will be necessary to clear the river before the company can safely operate. Jack stared, understanding dawning. You're baiting them. I am forcing their hand, Willoughby corrected. If they believe the charter is assured and that I am their ally, they will grow bold. Perhaps bold enough to make a mistake. An overt act of aggression against Crown personnel, myself, for example, would be most clarifying. It was a cold, ruthless strategy. Willoughby was using himself, and the covenant, as bait in a trap for the company. You're risking our lives, Jack said. I am gambling with all our lives, Mr. Tanner, Willoughby replied, sipping his port. For the highest of stakes. Now, we wait. And you should ensure your rangers are discreetly ready. When the company strikes, it must be against me, on Crown-controlled ground. The fort. Not your precious stone pool. The narrative must be perfect. The provocation and the trap sprung. The company took the bait. They moved faster than Willoughby anticipated. 2 nights later, a force of about 40 men, a mix of company mercenaries and hired ruffians from Sunhaven town, moved through the jungle towards Fort Defiance. Their orders, intercepted later, were clear: seize the commissioner, hold him, for his own safety, amid a native uprising, they would fabricate, and issue a desperate plea to the warship for immediate intervention. But Willoughby's spy had given him the timing. And Jack had rangers and Sun Children scouts watching every trail. The attack came at midnight. They rushed the fort's main gate, which was, strangely, unbarred. They poured into the compound, meeting no resistance. Confused, they headed for the command hut. Then the gate slammed shut behind them. Torches flared on the palisade walls. 40 rangers stood up, muskets aimed down into the compound. On the command hut roof, Ketch stood with a pair of the new breech-loading carbines. And standing calmly in the doorway of the hut was Sir James Willoughby, in his dressing gown, holding a pistol. In the name of the king, Willoughby's voice cut through the night, lay down your arms. You are caught in the act of attempting the kidnapping of a crown commissioner. The penalty is death. The mercenaries froze, realizing they were in a killing box. Their leader, a scarred former sergeant named Cobb, no relation to the lieutenant, snarled, "It's a trap. Fight your way out." A shot rang out. Not from the walls. Cobb clutched his chest, looking down in shock at the bloom of red on his shirt. He fell. On the roof, Ketch lowered his smoking carbine. Next man who moves joins him. It was over. The mercenaries dropped their weapons. Willoughby walked among them as they were shackled. He stopped before a man who was not a fighter, but a company factor in a stained waistcoat. You will return to your masters in Sunhaven town. You will tell them this: their petition for a royal charter is denied. Their actions tonight constitute a treasonous assault on the Crown's authority. All their existing concessions on the Sunhaven River are hereby forfeit, pending a full inquiry. The Crown will now treat directly with the recognized administrative entity in this territory, the Sunhaven River Covenant. The factor stared, dumbfounded. The world had just turned upside down. As the prisoners were led away, Willoughby turned to Jack. The commissioner's face was grimly satisfied. Now I have my irrefutable evidence. And you, Mr. Tanner, have your assurances of stability. You defended Crown authority. It will be in my report. He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Jack took it. It was not a handshake between friends, but a treaty between powers. The charter? Jack asked. Will be drafted accordingly. It will recognize the Covenant's internal autonomy under Crown sovereignty. You will collect taxes, maintain law, and manage resource extraction. In return, you grant the crown exclusive external trading rights and a 20% royalty on all mineral wealth. And you provide men for the colonial militia when called upon. It was a compromise. They would not be independent, but they would be recognized. They would have the law on their side. As Jack walked back to Stone Pool in the pre-dawn light, he felt not triumph, but a weary understanding. They had traded one master, the company, for another, the crown. But this master was farther away, and bound by a contract they had helped write. They had a charter now, not of rebellion, but of sanctioned existence. He looked at the silver token, then at the sleeping town. They had won their place at the table. But as he watched the first lights kindle in the windows of Stone Pool, he knew the most dangerous game was just beginning. The gold in the mountain was no longer just their secret. It was the currency of their survival, and it would draw every hungry eye in the empire. The king's charter was both shield and target. And Jack Tanner now stood squarely in the crossfire.